Exiled across the ocean by the Duke's pride, she carried his heir and the heart he never knew he had. The vessel rocked violently against the fury of the Atlantic, yet Marienne Valecrest stood immobile at the stern, her gaze fixed upon the diminishing shoreline of England. Winter's chill penetrated her woolen cloak, but it paled against the cold that had settled within her chest. 6 months since her banishment from Thaliverne Hall, yet the wound remained raw, bleeding anew with each breath of salt air. Behind her, Portsmouth harbour faded into morning mist, taking with it all that remained of her former life. "You shall not return to England whilst I draw breath," the Duke of Ebonshire had proclaimed before the assembly of his household. "Nor shall your name cross these thresholds again." A bitter smile crossed her lips as her hand found its way to the slight swell beneath her gown. The secret she carried would never reach his lordship's ears, not through scandal or whispered rumours that travelled like wildfire through London's drawing rooms. The precious burden she bore his child, his heir, would remain hers alone. "Madam, you must retire below," urged the cabin boy, his young face pinched with concern. "The captain fears the tempest worsens." "The tempest began long before this voyage, child," she replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "I shall weather it standing." She clutched the simple ivory ribbon tied about her wrist, the sole token she permitted herself to keep of Rowan Thaliverne, a memento from that single unguarded moment when his hand had brushed hers during a waltz, before pride reclaimed his heart and duty silenced his affections. The ship lurched, and Marienne braced herself against the railing. The vastness of the sea mirrored her uncertain future, foreign and treacherous, yet offering the promise of rebirth. In Baltimore, none would know her name or the scandal that had driven her from England's shores. None would whisper of the governess who had dared love a duke. "Farewell, your grace," she whispered to the horizon. "May your title warm your bed in the absence of what you cast away." The last glimpse of England disappeared beneath the grey curtain of rain, taking with it the remnants of Marienne Valecrest's tears. She would not weep again, not for him, not for the life denied her. The child within her womb deserved better than a mother shattered by rejection. From this day forward, she would be forged anew by the very pain meant to destroy her. Across the storm-tossed waters, the Duke of Ebonshire stood before the hearth of his private chambers, his expression as cold as the marble beneath his boots. The crackling flames cast dancing shadows across his face, illuminating eyes the colour of polished amber, eyes that refused to betray the turmoil raging beneath their surface. "Your Grace," announced the butler, his voice carefully neutral, "Lady Marbury awaits your presence in the drawing-room." Rowan Thaliverne, 7th Duke of Ebonshire, did not turn from his contemplation of the fire. "Inform her ladyship I am indisposed." "But, sir, she insists the matter concerns Miss Valecrest's departure and—" "Silence!" The words slashed through the air like a blade. The butler retreated a step, bowing deeply. "That name shall not be uttered within these walls. See to it that the staff understands, Hastings." "As you wish, your grace." When the door closed, Rowan unfurled his clenched fist, revealing the ivory dance card crushed within his palm. Her name, written in her own delicate hand, remained visible despite the crumpled paper. Marienne Valecrest, the woman who had dared presume her humble station, might elevate to match his own. "It was mercy," he whispered to the empty room. "Better a clean severance than a lifetime of societal scorn." Yet as he cast the card into the flames, watching as the fire consumed her name, Rowan could not name the hollow ache spreading through his chest. He was Ebonshire, bearer of a title 8 generations strong. What did he know of hearts or their breaking? What need had he of such fragile things when duty and blood demanded his allegiance? The fire devoured the last of the dance card, leaving nothing but ash and memory. Outside, rain lashed against leaded windows, and somewhere on distant waters, a ship carried Marienne toward America's shores. "Duty above all," he murmured, reaching for the brandy decanter, "as it must always be." 3 years passed like shadows across a sundial, marking their progression in the changes wrought upon flesh and spirit, rather than in the measured ticking of clocks. In the attic workroom of Madame Beaumont's millinery in Baltimore, Marienne guided her needle through fine silk, her fingers deft despite the fatigue that shadowed her eyes. The late afternoon sun filtered through dusty windows, gilding the room in amber light that reminded her painfully of a certain nobleman's gaze. "Mamma!" The childish voice drew her from reverie, and she turned to find her son standing in the doorway, a wooden horse clutched in one small hand. Alaric Valecrest possessed his father's eyes, liquid amber flecked with gold, bright with intelligence beyond his 3 years. His dark curls and the gentle curve of his mouth, however, were entirely her own. Each glance at his beloved face brought both joy and anguish, for in him she saw both her greatest treasure and most painful reminder. "My darling," she said, setting aside her work, "has Mrs. Wilkins tired of your horsemanship already?" The boy shook his head solemnly. "The horse needed rest, Mama. Even wooden steeds require their oats." Marienne laughed, the sound brightening the shabby room. "Indeed they do. Come, let me see what progress you've made with your letters." As she guided his small hand across the slate, tracing the alphabet with patient instruction, Marienne allowed herself to imagine for one forbidden moment a different life, one where Alaric learned his letters in a grand library beneath his father's approving gaze. The fantasy dissolved as quickly as it formed. That path had closed the moment Rowan Thallaverne had pronounced her exile. "Mama, why do my eyes shine gold when yours do not?" Alaric asked suddenly, peering up at her with innocent curiosity. The question pierced her heart like a thorn. "Because you were born of sunshine, my love," she replied, the familiar lie bitter upon her tongue. "God gave you special eyes to light your way." The child seemed satisfied, returning to his letters with renewed concentration. Marienne touched the ivory ribbon at her wrist, faded now from constant wear, but still a tether to what once was. Some chains, she had discovered, were forged not of iron but of memory, and these proved the most difficult to break. In the lavish drawing-room of Thallaverne Hall, Rowan Thallaverne sat with rigid posture as his solicitor droned through quarterly accounts. Golden afternoon light streamed through tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced in the still air. The Duke's attention, however, remained fixed upon the hearth where a small fire crackled despite the mild spring weather. 3 years had passed since he had last uttered her name, yet Marienne's absence haunted every corner of his ancestral home. "Your Grace." The solicitor's voice penetrated his thoughts. "The ledgers await your signature." Rowan nodded curtly, reaching for the quill. As he dipped it in ink, a commotion in the hallway drew his attention. The door burst open, revealing Lady Seraphine Marbury, her face flushed with excitement beneath an elaborate bonnet. "Cousin!" she exclaimed, sweeping into the room without invitation. "You must forgive the intrusion, but I carry news that cannot wait upon propriety." The Duke's expression hardened. "Mr. Whittington and I are engaged in matters of estate, Seraphine. Whatever gossip London has spawned can surely await a more convenient hour." Lady Marbury's thin lips curved into a smile that did not reach her cold eyes. "Not gossip, dear cousin, but tidings from across the Atlantic. Do you recall your former governess, the one who departed under such unfortunate circumstances?" The quill snapped between Rowan's fingers, splattering ink across immaculate accounts. "Mr. Whittington," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We shall continue tomorrow." The solicitor bowed hastily and retreated, closing the door with palpable relief. When they were alone, Rowan stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over Lady Marbury. "Speak plainly or not at all, Seraphine. My patience wears thin." "Mrs. Chambers' niece has returned from Baltimore with the most extraordinary tale," she replied, removing her gloves with deliberate slowness. "It seems your Miss Valecrest has established herself as a milliner's assistant. Quite the fall from educating nobility, wouldn't you agree? But the truly fascinating detail, cousin, is the child. Something cold and terrible clutched at Rowan's heart. Child? A boy, nearly 3 years of age, with the most remarkable eyes." Seraphine paused, savouring his rigid countenance. "Eyes, cousin, of unmistakable amber, the precise shade that has marked the Thallaverne line for 8 generations." The room seemed to tilt beneath Rowan's feet. "So you presume much from a coincidence of colouring?" "Do I? Then explain why the boy bears the name Alaric. Your grandfather's name, is it not? Hardly common among the colonial population." She circled him like a predator. One might almost believe the child was born precisely 9 months after Miss Valecrest's hasty departure from our shores. Rowan turned to the window, struggling to master the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm his carefully constructed facade. A son? An heir of his blood, raised in obscurity, bearing no knowledge of his birthright? The possibility was both wondrous and horrifying. "You have shared this speculation with others?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Only with you, cousin. Family loyalty demands such discretion." Her smile belied her words. "Though one wonders how long such a secret can remain buried, the Tun has an insatiable appetite for scandal, particularly when it concerns England's most eligible duke." Rowan faced her, his expression now carved from stone. "Leave me. Of course, I merely thought you should be informed of a potential complication to your lineage. She paused at the door. After all, what is a duke without legitimate succession? When she departed, Rowan collapsed into his chair, the weight of revelation crushing upon his chest. If true, and in his heart he knew it must be, then he had not merely banished a woman who loved him beyond station, he had exiled his own child, his heir, his blood. The magnitude of his ignorance staggered him. He reached into his waistcoat and withdrew a small object that had remained his secret companion for 3 long years, a single pearl button from Marienne's gown, discovered beneath a ballroom chair after her departure. He had kept it as penance, a reminder of duty's victory over desire. Now it mocked him with new significance. "A son," he whispered to the empty room. "My son." In that moment, something shifted within the Duke of Ebonshire's carefully ordered world. The foundations of pride and duty that had governed his existence began to crack, revealing a truth he had long denied. Beneath his title and lands, he possessed a heart, one that had been silently breaking since the day he had sent Marienne away. The millinery shop stood 3 stories tall on a modest Baltimore street, its windows displaying the latest fashion in ladies' bonnets. Inside, Marienne moved among the customers with practiced grace, a simple dress of navy wool, a stark contrast to the elaborate creations she arranged on velvet stands. Years of careful labor had elevated her from mere seamstress to assistant shopkeeper, a position that afforded Alaric modest comforts she had once taken for granted. "The emerald ribbon complements your complexion beautifully, Mrs. Hargrove," she said, adjusting a hat upon a wealthy patron's coiffure. "Madame Beaumont has outdone herself with this design." The bell above the door chimed, and Marienne glanced up to see her employer's daughter entering with flushed cheeks and excited eyes. "Miss Valcrest," called Josephine Beaumont, waving a letter. "You have correspondence from England." The hat box Marienne carried slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, spilling its delicate contents across the polished floor. England? Who would write after so many years of silence? Her landlady in Portsmouth had forwarded her few possessions months after her arrival in Baltimore, but no letters had crossed the Atlantic, bearing her name since that day. "Forgive me, Mrs. Hargrove," she murmured, gathering the fallen hat with trembling hands. A moment of clumsiness. When the customer departed, Marienne retreated to the back room where Josephine waited, the mysterious letter extended like an offering. "It arrived with the morning post," the young woman explained. "Father says the handwriting appears most refined." Marienne accepted the envelope, her breath catching at the familiar wax seal impressed with the Thaliverne crest. She had seen that insignia countless times upon documents in the Duke's study, where she had once tutored his young cousin in French and deportment. Never had she expected to see it directed to her humble American address. "Thank you, Josephine," she said quietly. "Would you mind watching Alaric a moment? He is with your mother in the workroom." Alone, Marienne sank onto a stool, the letter heavy in her hands. 3 years of silence, 3 years of building a life from the ashes of aristocratic rejection, and now this intrusion from the past. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the crisp paper within. The sight of his handwriting, elegant and controlled, brought an unwelcome surge of memory. Rowan bent over estate ledgers, his profile illuminated by candlelight. Rowan's rare smile when she had corrected his Latin translation. Rowan's face transformed by passion in those stolen moments, before duty had reasserted its claim. "Miss Valcrest, it has come to my attention that circumstances of our parting may have left certain matters unresolved. Business brings me to American shores in the coming month, and I shall call upon you at the direction noted on this correspondence. There are questions that require answers. Prepare yourself accordingly. Ebonshire." No salutation, no explanation, beyond the cryptic reference to unresolved matters, yet even in those cold lines Marienne sensed the tremor of uncertainty beneath his customary arrogance. Questions that required answers. Could he have discovered Alaric's existence? The thought sent panic coursing through her veins. "Mama!" Alaric's voice preceded him as he bounded into the room, his small face alight with excitement. "Miss Josephine says we may visit the harbour this Sunday." Marienne hastily folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. Did she indeed? What a kind invitation. She gathered her son into her arms, inhaling the sweet scent of his hair as fear and determination warred within her breast. Rowan Thaliverne had cast them both aside once before. She would die before allowing him to disrupt the life she had built, or claim the child he had unknowingly rejected. "May we see the big ships, Mama?" Alaric asked, his amber eyes, so like his father's, wide with anticipation. "Yes, my darling. she replied, forcing brightness into her voice. "We shall see all the ships you wish." And silently she added, "And pray that one of them carries your father back to England before he can destroy what remains of our peace." The harbour bristled with masts and smokestacks, a forest of wood and iron stretching toward the autumn sky. Marienne kept a firm grip on Alaric's hand as they navigated the bustling docks, the boy's excitement evident in his bouncing steps and stream of questions about each vessel they passed. She had delayed this promised excursion for 3 weeks, hoping each day would bring news that the Duke of Ebonshire had abandoned his American journey. No such reprieve had arrived. "Look, Mama, that ship flies England's colours." Alaric pointed toward a sleek merchant vessel where sailors scurried like ants across the rigging. "Indeed it does," she replied, struggling to keep her voice light. "Many ships come from England to trade goods. Like the tea we drink at breakfast." "Precisely so, clever boy." They continued their promenade along the waterfront, pausing to watch stevedores unload crates of exotic spices and bolts of fine cloth. The November air carried a biting chill, and Marienne wrapped her woolen shawl more tightly around her shoulders, grateful for Alaric's warm coat, a recent extravagance purchased with her carefully saved earnings. "Miss Valcrest." The deep voice behind her froze Marienne mid-step. 3 years had passed, yet she would have recognized its timbre anywhere, in crowded ballrooms or empty corridors, in dreams that still plagued her slumber, despite her best efforts to banish them. Slowly, she turned, her fingers tightening instinctively around Alaric's small hand. Rowan Thallaverne stood before her, taller than memory had preserved him, his broad shoulders encased in a greatcoat of finest wool. The sea voyage had not diminished his aristocratic bearing. If anything, it had honed it to a sharper edge. His amber eyes, the precise shade of her son's, moved from her face to the child at her side, widening almost imperceptibly. "Your Grace," she acknowledged, her courtesy a hollow echo of their former stations. What an unexpected encounter! His gaze remained fixed upon Alaric, who regarded the stranger with uncharacteristic solemnity. "I informed you of my arrival in my correspondence. Did you not receive it?" "I did. I had hoped it was merely an idle threat." Something flickered across his features, pain perhaps, or anger swiftly mastered. "I see the years have not softened your perception of me." "Why should they?" "Time changes circumstances, Your Grace, not truth." Alaric tugged at her skirt. "Mama, who is this gentleman?" Marienne felt Rowan's sharp intake of breath at the word mama, saw the colour drain from his face as the confirmation of his suspicions took solid form before him. The moment she had dreaded for 3 years had arrived on a windswept Baltimore dock, with no preparation or defence beyond the fierce love that had sustained her through exile. "An acquaintance from England, my darling," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "His Grace the Duke of Ebonshire." Alaric executed a perfect bow, exactly as she had taught him during their lessons in deportment, lessons she had included despite their humble circumstances, for she had been determined her son would possess every advantage of education, if not of birth. "I am honoured to make your acquaintance, Your Grace," the boy said, his childish voice nevertheless carrying perfect diction. Rowan appeared momentarily speechless, his composure shaken by this miniature embodiment of aristocratic manners wrapped in a child's innocent charm. When he spoke, his voice had lost its customary authority. "The honour is mine." He hesitated, clearly seeking the child's name. "Alaric," Marienne supplied, lifting her chin. "Alaric Valcrest." Recognition flashed in Rowan's eyes, recognition of his grandfather's name, bestowed upon a son he had never known existed. For a moment, the mighty Duke of Ebonshire seemed utterly lost, adrift in a sea of consequences he had never anticipated when he had banished a governess for the crime of loving above her station. "We must be going," Marienne said into the charged silence. "Good day, Your Grace." "Wait." The word escaped him with uncharacteristic urgency. "I would speak with you, privately. Name a time and place." She hesitated, torn between the desire to flee and the knowledge that postponement would only prolong her torment. "Tomorrow, the millinery shop on Charles Street. Ask for Miss Valcrest." He nodded once, his gaze still fixed upon Alaric with hungry intensity. "Until tomorrow, then." As Marienne led her son away, she felt the weight of Rowan's stare upon her back, a physical pressure that threatened to buckle her carefully constructed defences. She had weathered the storm of scandal, crossed an ocean, and built a life from nothing. Yet one encounter with Rowan Thallaverne left her feeling as vulnerable as the day he had pronounced her exile. "Mamma," Alaric asked as they turned onto a quieter street, Why did that gentleman look at me so strangely? Marienne swallowed the knot of fear in her throat. Sometimes, my love, people are surprised by what they discover. Morning arrived with a fine mist hovering above Baltimore's streets, shrouding the city in pearl-grey light. Marienne moved through the millinery shop with mechanical precision, arranging bonnets and instructing apprentices, while her mind remained fixed upon the impending confrontation. She had sent Alaric to spend the day with Madame Beaumont's sister. Unable to bear the thought of Rowan and their son occupying the same space without proper preparation. "Do you appear pale, my dear?" observed Madame Beaumont, her French accent still pronounced despite decades in America. "Perhaps you should rest a while." Marienne forced a smile. "I am quite well, thank you, merely distracted by personal matters." These personal matters, they would not involve the distinguished English gentleman who inquired after your address yesterday. The older woman's eyes twinkled with knowing curiosity. Such fine bearing, such elegant attire, most unusual among our clientele. Before Marienne could formulate a response, the shop bell chimed. She turned to find Rowan standing in the doorway, his tall frame seeming to diminish the modest establishment by comparison. He had exchanged yesterday's traveling clothes for a perfectly tailored morning coat and waistcoat of charcoal grey. The silver chain of his pocket watch glinted against the dark fabric, a subtle reminder of the wealth and privilege that separated their worlds. "Your Grace," Madame Beaumont exclaimed, dropping into a curtsy that betrayed her European upbringing, "what an honor to welcome you to our humble establishment." "The honor is mine, Madame," Rowan replied with practiced courtesy. "Might I have a word with Miss Vailcrest on a matter of personal business?" The shopkeeper's expression brightened with undisguised interest. "But of course, you may use the fitting room for privacy. Josephine, attend the counter while Miss Vailcrest speaks with His Grace." Marienne led Rowan to the small chamber at the rear of the shop, a space barely large enough to accommodate his imposing presence. When the door closed behind them, she remained standing, unwilling to cede any advantage by taking the single chair. "I see your position has improved since our last meeting," Rowan observed, his gaze traveling over her simple but well-made gown of blue wool. "I have built what I could from what remained after your judgment," she replied, her voice carefully controlled. "State your purpose, Your Grace. I have duties to attend." His jaw tightened at her cool dismissal. "Very well. Direct speech it shall be." He drew a breath, his composure momentarily faltering. "The boy, Alaric, he is my son." It was not a question but a pronouncement, laden with the weight of certainty. "He is my son," Marienne corrected, her fingers instinctively seeking the faded ribbon at her wrist. "You forfeited any claim when you banished us from England. I banished you without knowledge of his existence. Would it have altered your decision?" She searched his face for some flicker of regret, some indication that the man she had once loved still existed beneath the aristocratic mask. "Would the great Duke of Ebonshire have acknowledged a child born to a mere governess?" Rowan's amber eyes darkened. "You denied me the opportunity to make that choice, as you denied me any choice but exile." The words burst from her with unexpected vehemence. "You cast me aside like a garment that had served its purpose. What maternal instinct would not protect a child from such cold dismissal?" He took a step toward her, close enough that she could detect the familiar scent of sandalwood and leather that had once intoxicated her senses. "I have crossed an ocean to find him, Marienne, to find you both. Does that suggest indifference to you?" "It suggests the entitled persistence of a man accustomed to possessing whatever he desires," she countered, refusing to yield ground despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Alaric knows nothing of you, nor of his heritage. He is happy, well-educated and loved beyond measure. What could you possibly offer that would justify disrupting his world?" "His birthright," Rowan answered simply. "His name, his future as heir to Ebonshire." Marienne laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. "His name is Valicrest and his future is whatever he chooses to build, not a burden of duty and coldness imposed by accident of birth." A muscle worked in Rowan's jaw as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I wish to know my son, Marienne. I wish him to know me, not as the villain of your doubtless bitter recollections, but as the father who—" he faltered, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "The father who would have welcomed him had he known." The sincerity in his voice shook her more deeply than his anger could have. This was unfamiliar territory, a Rowan Thalaverne who spoke of wishes rather than commands, who revealed uncertainty rather than unyielding pride. "You abandoned me without a backward glance," she said softly. "How can I entrust my child to a heart so easily governed by duty at the expense of feeling?" "Not easily governed," he corrected, his voice equally soft. "Painfully mastered through years of expectation and training, you think I felt nothing when you departed, that I have known peace in the years since." Before she could respond, the door opened, revealing Madame Beaumont's apologetic face. "Forgive the interruption, but Mrs. Hamilton has arrived for her fitting, and she will accept no substitute for your skilled hand, Miss Valecrest." Marienne nodded, grateful for the reprieve. "I must attend to my work, Your Grace." Rowan straightened, the brief glimpse of vulnerability submerged beneath his customary reserve. "We shall continue this discussion. Tomorrow, perhaps you might permit me to call upon you and Alaric at your residence. I have no wish to interfere with your livelihood." She hesitated, torn between protectiveness and the growing certainty that this confrontation could not be indefinitely delayed. 4 o'clock. "We take tea, then. I shall provide the address. Until tomorrow, then." He bowed, the gesture formal yet somehow conveying more than words could express. As he departed, Marienne noticed how the shop's female patrons followed his progress with admiring glances and whispered comments. He remained, as he had always been, a man whose mere presence altered the atmosphere of a room. Once she had been foolish enough to believe herself immune to such effects. The trembling of her hands as she prepared for Mrs. Hamilton's fitting suggested that some follies persisted, despite the passage of years and oceans. The modest 2-room apartment above a bookseller's shop had never seemed so inadequate as it did when Marienne surveyed it, through imagined aristocratic eyes. She had taken pains with its appearance, fresh flowers in a chipped vase, the worn furniture polished to a soft gleam, a small fire burning in the grate to dispel November's chill. Yet no amount of preparation could transform these humble quarters into a setting worthy of a duke's visit. "Will the gentleman bring a gift, Mamma?" Alaric asked, carefully arranging his wooden soldiers on the hearthrug. "Mrs. Wilkins says gentlemen always bring gifts when they call upon ladies." Marienne smoothed her best dress, a deep burgundy wool that had once been Madame Beaumont's, altered to suit her slimmer frame. "This is not that sort of visit, my love. His Grace wishes merely to make our acquaintance." "But he already knows you from England," the boy persisted, his quick mind seizing upon the inconsistency. "And we met him at the harbour, so it cannot be a first acquaintance." Before she could formulate an explanation appropriate for a child's understanding, a knock sounded at the door. Marienne drew a steadying breath and crossed the room, composing her features into a mask of calm dignity before admitting Rowan Thalivern into her modest home. The Duke entered, removing his hat to reveal hair as dark as Alaric's, though styled with aristocratic precision. In one hand he carried a package wrapped in brown paper and string. "Miss Valecrest," he greeted her with a formal bow, then turned to Alaric with a smile that transformed his austere features. "And Master Alaric, I trust I find you well today?" The boy stood and executed another perfect bow. "Indeed, Your Grace, I am in excellent health and spirits." Rowan's smile deepened at this miniature display of adult manners. "I am most gratified to hear it." He extended the package toward Alaric. "I noticed your interest in vessels during our meeting at the harbour. Perhaps this might appeal to your nautical inclinations." Marienne watched with a mixture of apprehension and resignation as her son accepted the gift with proper thanks, his small fingers working eagerly at the string. When the paper fell away, it revealed an exquisitely crafted model ship, complete with tiny cloth sails and miniature brass fittings. "A clipper ship!" Alaric exclaimed, his customary decorum forgotten in childish delight. "With real canvas sails. Look, Mamma, it is very fine," she acknowledged, unable to deny the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "What do we say to His Grace?" "Thank you, sir," Alaric said, his amber eyes, so like his father's, shining with genuine pleasure. "I shall treasure it always." Something passed across Rowan's face then, a fleeting expression of wonder and pain quickly mastered. "It pleases me greatly that you approve, Master Alaric. Perhaps you might show me how she sails while your mother prepares our tea." Marienne recognized the ploy for what it was, an attempt to establish rapport with Alaric away from her mediating presence, yet found herself unable to object without appearing churlish. With a nod of acquiescence, she retreated to the small kitchen area to arrange the modest tea service she had borrowed from her landlady for the occasion. From this vantage, she could observe without being obvious in her scrutiny. Rowan had knelt beside Alaric on the hearthrug, his fine coat discarded, explaining the function of each sail and line with surprising knowledge. The boy listened with rapt attention, occasionally interrupting with questions that Rowan answered with patient detail. Never in all her imaginings of this meeting had Marienne envisioned the Duke of Ebonshire on his knees beside a coal grate, demonstrating the proper handling of a toy ship to a child who represented his greatest social transgression. The scene before her defied all expectations, revealing a man far removed from the cold aristocrat who had pronounced her exile 3 years earlier. "Your tea, Your Grace," she announced, setting the tray upon the small table. "I fear it is not what you are accustomed to, but it is the best Ceylon from the harbour shops." Rowan rose with fluid grace despite his tall frame, assisting Alaric in placing the model ship safely upon the mantelpiece before joining her. "I have developed a fondness for American simplicity during my brief sojourn," he replied. "Some conventions of English society seem increasingly burdensome with distance." She poured the tea into her 3 best cups, mismatched china salvaged from various sources, none bearing the fine gilt edges or delicate patterns that would have graced Ebonshire's table. "How long do you remain in Baltimore?" she inquired, striving for a neutral topic. "That depends," he answered, his gaze steady upon her face, "upon the outcome of certain discussions." Alaric, having secured a small spice cake from the tea tray, looked between the adults with curious eyes. "Do you have a ship of your own, Your Grace? A real one, I mean, not a toy." Rowan smiled again, the expression transforming his severe features into something almost boyish. "Not precisely my own, Master Alaric, but I did secure passage on a fine vessel called the Marienne. Perhaps if your mother permits, you might accompany me to view her tomorrow. I believe the captain would welcome such an enthusiastic visitor." Marienne stiffened at this transparent attempt to secure further contact, but Alaric's face had already illuminated with excitement. "Oh, might I, Mama? Might I see a real ship with His Grace?" "I shall accompany you, of course," Rowan added, addressing her unspoken concern, "and return him promptly afterward. You have my word as Ebonshire." She hesitated, torn between maternal protectiveness and the undeniable pleasure the excursion would bring her son. "Very well," she conceded finally. "But I shall accompany you both." "Splendid," Rowan declared, setting aside his teacup. "Then it is settled. Shall we convene at the harbour at 11 tomorrow morning? The tide will be favourable for viewing the full magnificence of the Meridian." Alaric clapped his hands in delight, then remembered his manners and composed his features into a more dignified expression. "I shall be punctual and properly attired, sir." Rowan's expression softened as he regarded the boy, a perfect blend of Marienne's delicate features and his own colouring. "I have no doubt of that, Master Alaric. You are clearly a young gentleman of exceptional quality." As Marienne observed this exchange, a troubling realization took root within her heart. Rowan Thalaverne had not crossed an ocean merely to satisfy curiosity about an illegitimate offspring. The care with which he cultivated Alaric's favour, the genuine interest he displayed in the child's thoughts and preferences, these spoke of deeper intentions than a brief acknowledgement of paternity. He meant to claim his son, perhaps even to take him back to England. The thought sent a chill through her veins that no amount of tea could dispel. The Meridian towered above the dock, her 3 masts stretching toward the clear November sky like sentinels. Alaric gazed upward in wordless wonder, his small hand clasped firmly in Rowan's larger one as they approached the gangplank. Marienne followed a step behind, her apprehension growing with each moment that strengthened the bond between father and son. "She's the fastest clipper on the Atlantic route," Rowan explained, his voice warm with enthusiasm that matched Alaric's. "See how her bow cuts the water. That design allows her to sail almost directly into the wind, like a knife through butter," Alaric exclaimed, his free hand gesturing to demonstrate the motion. Rowan laughed, a genuine sound of pleasure that Marienne had heard only rarely during their time at Thalaverne Hall. "Precisely so. You have a nautical mind, young sir." Captain Harrington greeted them at the top of the gangplank, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of Alaric's eager expression. "Welcome aboard the Meridian, young master. His Grace informs me you have an interest in maritime affairs." "Yes, sir," Alaric replied with a perfect bow. "I wish to learn everything about your magnificent vessel." The captain chuckled, clearly charmed. "Then allow me to provide a comprehensive tour. We shall begin with the helm and proceed to the forecastle." For the next hour, Marienne watched as her son was introduced to the mysteries of celestial navigation, the function of each sail, and the duties of every crew member. Rowan remained at the boy's side throughout, occasionally supplementing the captain's explanations with observations of his own. The easy manner in which father and son interacted, sharing glances of mutual understanding, completing each other's thoughts, struck her with painful clarity. Despite 3 years of separation, some connection of blood or spirit had formed between them, as natural as breathing. "He has your intellect," Rowan observed quietly as they stood watching Alaric examine the ship's chronometer under the captain's supervision. And your courage. But the maritime fascination, I fear that comes from my side. My grandfather was similarly afflicted. Your grandfather Alaric, she said, unable to keep a note of challenge from her voice. For whom I named him. Rowan's expression softened, a gesture that humbles me more than I can express. You might have denied him any connection to his paternal line. Instead, you preserved it even in exile. I wanted him to have something of his heritage, Marienne admitted, even if he could never claim it openly. A silence fell between them, filled with the sounds of the harbour, gulls crying, water lapping against the hull, sailors calling to one another as they worked the rigging above. He could claim it, Rowan said finally, his voice low and intense. Openly, publicly, with all the privileges and protections his birth entitles him to receive. Marienne turned to face him fully, searching his expression for hidden meanings. What precisely are you proposing, Your Grace? Return to England, both of you. The words emerged with quiet force. Alaric shall be acknowledged as my heir, raised at Thalavern Hall with every advantage of education and position. You shall have a suitable residence nearby, a cottage on the estate perhaps, with an income sufficient for comfort. The offer struck Marienne like a physical blow. After years of struggling to provide for her son through honest labour, to be offered wealth and security with such casual ease, it was both tempting and profoundly insulting. A cottage and an income, she repeated, her voice carefully controlled despite the anger rising within her. How generous! And what precisely would be my position in this arrangement? The disgraced former governess, tucked away in a corner of your estate, permitted occasional visits with the son you have claimed as your own. Rowan's brow furrowed. That is it not? You speak of Alaric's advantages, his birthright, his future, but you say nothing of his heart, of the bond between mother and child that has sustained us through years of exile. Do you imagine he would happily exchange my constant presence for occasional visits arranged at your convenience? I had not considered— No, she interrupted, her composure finally fracturing. You had not considered. Just as you failed to consider what your rejection would mean to a woman who loved you beyond reason or station, your world remains one of property and titles, of bloodlines and inheritance. Mine is built upon something far more fragile yet infinitely stronger, love freely given and received. Alaric's delighted laughter floated across the deck as the captain allowed him to grip the great wheel momentarily. The sound pierced Marienne's heart with its innocence, its trust in a world that had not yet revealed its capacity for cruelty. I will not separate him from you, Rowan said after a long moment, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. That was never my intention, but I cannot abandon him a second time, Marienne. Knowing of his existence has altered everything. She turned away, unable to bear the sincerity in his amber gaze, the same eyes that had once hardened with pride as he pronounced her unworthy. You speak as though your discovery grants you immediate rights. 3 years, Rowan. 3 years I have raised him alone, loved him, taught him, protected him from a world that would judge him harshly for the circumstances of his birth. What gives you the right to appear now and claim what you once discarded? Not what, he corrected quietly. Who, and I did not discard him. I never knew of him. A convenient absolution, an agonizing truth. He stepped closer, close enough that she could detect the familiar scent that still haunted her dreams. I have committed many sins, Marienne, but willful abandonment of my child is not among them. Had I known— You would have what? She challenged. Acknowledged a bastard born to a governess, risked scandal and censure from your precious society, defied Lady Seraphine and all the voices that whispered I was beneath your touch, much less your protection? A muscle worked in Rowan's jaw. Perhaps I would not have had the courage then, but I have it now. Before she could respond, Alaric came bounding toward them, his face flushed with excitement. Mama, Captain Harrington says I may return tomorrow to see the cargo loaded, if you permit it. May I, please? Marienne forced a smile, unwilling to shadow her son's joy with the tension crackling between her and Rowan. We shall see, my love. For now we must thank His Grace and the captain for their hospitality and return home. You have lessons to complete before supper. The boy's face fell momentarily, then brightened as he turned to Rowan. Will you accompany us home, Your Grace? I should like to show you my book of sea creatures. It has the most marvelous illustrations of whales. Rowan glanced at Marienne, seeking permission in a gesture that would have been unthinkable from the imperious duke she had known in England. When she gave a slight nod, his expression softened with gratitude. It would be my great pleasure, Master Alaric. he replied, offering his hand to the child. "I have a particular interest in the sperm whale myself, having once observed one from the deck of a ship not unlike this one." As they descended the gangplank, Alaric between them, Marienne was struck by the tableau they presented, a family group to any observer's eye, united by blood and affection, despite the chasm of circumstance that had separated them for so long. The thought brought both warmth and caution to her heart, for in that moment of apparent harmony lurked a question she dared not voice. What price would Rowan Thalaverne ultimately demand for this newfound paternal devotion? Days passed with the rhythm of tide and shore, each one bringing Rowan deeper into the small world Marienne had built for Alaric. The Duke arrived each afternoon bearing modest gifts: a book of sailing ships, a wooden puzzle box, a pair of brass navigation calipers, suitable for small hands. He listened with genuine interest as Alaric described his lessons and dreams, offering guidance that never veered into condescension. Most surprising to Marienne was Rowan's willingness to adapt to their humble circumstances, sitting contentedly on worn furniture, drinking tea from mismatched cups, assisting Alaric with tasks that would have been relegated to servants at Thalaverne Hall. "He understands the constellations better than students twice his age," Rowan observed one evening as they watched Alaric plotting star charts by lamplight. "His mind is extraordinary." "He has always possessed an uncommon curiosity," Marienne replied, her voice softened by maternal pride. "Even as an infant he seemed to study the world rather than merely observe it." Rowan's expression grew contemplative. "I missed those early moments. His first words, his first steps." "His first word was book," she said, offering the memory as an unexpected peace offering. "Not mama or milk, but book." He pointed to my Bible and declared it with such authority that Madame Beaumont laughed for days afterward. A smile transformed Rowan's austere features. "At his age I was apparently most concerned with horses. My father claimed I could name every breed in the royal stables before I could properly pronounce my own title." These moments of shared confidences had become more frequent, building a fragile bridge across the chasm of their past. Yet Marienne remained wary, conscious that Rowan had not abandoned his desire to bring Alaric, and by extension herself, back to England. "The Meridian departs in 3 days," he said after Alaric had been tucked into bed, his voice carefully neutral. "I had hoped by now to have reached some agreement regarding our son's future." Marienne stiffened at the word "our," though she could not deny its truth. "What agreement could satisfy us both? You wish him acknowledged as your heir, raised in privilege and preparation for a title he may one day inherit. I wish him free of the constraints that come with such position, free to choose his own path without the weight of centuries pressing upon his shoulders." "Is that truly your objection? That aristocratic duty would somehow diminish him?" Rowan leaned forward, his gaze intense in the lamplight. "Or is it that you fear returning to England would mean returning to the pain of our parting?" The directness of his question startled her. In their previous encounters, both at Thalaverne Hall and since his arrival in Baltimore, they had circled carefully around the personal nature of their former connection, speaking instead of Alaric's welfare and future prospects. "Both," she admitted finally, her fingers finding the faded ribbon at her wrist. "I have no wish to witness your eventual marriage to some suitable lady of quality, to see Alaric relegated to the position of acknowledged but ultimately secondary heir once legitimate sons arrive." Rowan's expression darkened. "You think me capable of such coldness toward my own child? I think society capable of demanding it, and you have always been a servant to duty above all else." He rose suddenly, pacing the small confines of the apartment with restless energy. "I speak of the man I was, not the man who stands before you now. 3 years of emptiness have taught me the cost of pride, Marienne. 3 years of walking the halls of Thalaverne alone, of enduring meaningless social obligations, of evaluating potential brides based on dowry and connections rather than—" He stopped, turning to face her with raw vulnerability. "Rather than the capacity to make my heart beat faster with a single glance." Marienne felt heat rise to her cheeks, memories of stolen moments in the library and garden flooding back with painful clarity. "Pretty words, Rowan, but words change nothing of our circumstances. You remain Ebonshire, bound by the expectations of your title and position. I remain a woman who has learned to survive without the protection of either." "And if I were to offer more than protection?" he asked, his voice dropping to a register that once had weakened her resolve in shadowed alcoves. "If I were to offer legitimacy not only to Alaric, but to our connection as well." She stared at him, scarcely daring to interpret his meaning. Speak plainly, Your Grace. I have no patience for aristocratic riddles. Marry me." The words emerged without preamble or qualification. "Return to England as my wife, not my ward or dependent. Let Alaric take his rightful place as legitimate heir to Ebonshire. Born of a union society, cannot question or condemn." Marienne felt as though the floor had shifted beneath her feet. "You cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious in my life." Rowan crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his, a gesture that would have been unthinkable from the proud Duke, who had once dismissed her affections as inappropriate to her station. "I lost you once through pride and adherence to empty social conventions. I will not lose you again, nor will I be separated from the son we created." Her heart raced painfully against her ribs. The scandal would be immense. Lady Seraphine and her circle would never accept such a match. Let them object. I am Ebonshire. My choice of bride is mine to make. You once thought differently. I once was a fool. His hands tightened around hers. Say you will consider it, at least, for Alaric's sake, if not for the memory of what once existed between us. Before she could respond, a cough sounded from the small adjoining room where Alaric slept. Both turned at the sound, then exchanged a glance of parental concern. "He seemed warm at bedtime," Marienne said, rising to check on her son. "Perhaps it is merely a winter chill." But the sight that greeted her sent fear coursing through her veins. Alaric lay tangled in his sheets, his small face flushed with fever, his breathing labored with each ragged cough. When she touched his forehead, the heat radiating from his skin confirmed her worst fears. "Rowan," she called, maternal instinct overriding any pretense of formality. "Fetch water and clean cloths. Quickly." He appeared in the doorway, his expression changing from confusion to alarm as he took in the child's condition. Without question or hesitation, he moved to obey, returning moments later with the requested items. "We must reduce his fever," Marienne explained, wringing out a cloth in cool water and placing it on Alaric's forehead. "And ease his breathing. There is willow bark in the kitchen cabinet. It makes a tea that helps with fever." Rowan nodded, moving with efficiency that belied his aristocratic upbringing. As he prepared the medicinal tea, Marienne whispered soothing words to Alaric, whose eyes flickered open with confused recognition. "Mama," he murmured, his voice scratchy and weak. "My chest hurts." "I know, my darling. We are going to make it better." She glanced up as Rowan returned with the steaming cup. "His Grace is here to help us." Alaric turned his head slightly, offering a wan smile. "Father," he whispered, using the term he had begun to adopt in recent days. "Will you tell me about the stars again?" The words seemed to pierce Rowan to his core. He knelt beside the bed, one hand gently smoothing the damp curls from Alaric's forehead. "Of course, my brave sailor. But first you must drink this tea your mother has prepared. It will make the hurt in your chest easier to bear." Together they coaxed the boy to sip the bitter brew, supporting his small frame as another bout of coughing racked his body. When he finally drifted into fitful sleep, Marienne and Rowan exchanged a glance of shared concern. "I shall fetch Dr. Morrison," Rowan said, already reaching for his coat. "He attended me when the Meridian's physician was unavailable. He will come immediately." Marienne nodded, too worried to argue or insist she could manage alone. As Rowan departed into the night, she continued her vigil, changing the cool cloths as they warmed against Alaric's burning skin, whispering prayers that had sustained her through the darkest days of exile. "Please," she murmured, one hand protectively covering her son's small fingers, "please do not take him from me. Not now. Not when his father has finally found him." The night stretched endlessly, marked by Alaric's labored breathing and periodic fits of coughing that shook his small frame. Dr. Morrison arrived promptly, his examination thorough and his diagnosis grave. Pneumonia, advancing rapidly through the child's lungs. "Keep him warm but not overheated," the physician instructed as he packed his instruments. "Continue with the willow bark tea and add this tincture of elderberry for the cough. I shall return in the morning to assess his progress." Rowan followed the doctor to the door, their voices lowered in consultation that Marienne could not hear from her position at Alaric's bedside. When he returned, his expression was somber, yet determined. "Dr. Morrison believes the crisis will peak within the next day," he said, removing his coat and rolling up his fine linen shirt sleeves. "Until then, we must maintain constant care." "We?" Marienne questioned, too exhausted for pretense. "Surely His Grace has more pressing engagements than tending a sick child." Rowan's amber eyes, so like Alaric's, flashed with sudden emotion. "There exists nothing on this earth more pressing than our son's recovery," he stated with quiet intensity. "I have missed 3 years of his life through ignorance. I will not miss a single moment more through choice, least of all when he faces such peril." The conviction in his voice silenced any further objection. As the night deepened around them, they established an unspoken rhythm of care. Marienne preparing medicinal teas and broths, Rowan supporting Alaric's slight weight during coughing spells, both taking turns applying cool compresses to his burning forehead and chest. In those hours of shared vigil, the barriers between them, of class, of past hurts, of pride, seemed to dissolve like morning mist before the sun. They were simply parents united in fear and hope, their every thought bent toward the child who represented both their greatest joy and most profound vulnerability. Dawn arrived with a driving rain that lashed against the windows, turning the modest apartment into an island of lamplight amidst gathering gloom. Alaric's fever had risen despite their efforts, his breathing now shallow and rapid between bouts of coughing that produced a terrifying rattle from deep within his chest. "The medicine isn't working," Marienne said, desperation edging her voice as she changed yet another compress. "We're losing him, Rowan." He grasped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "We will not lose him. I refuse to accept that possibility." His voice, though gentle, carried the iron determination that had once commanded estates and influenced Parliament. "The Meridian's physician has experience with tropical fevers far worse than this. I shall fetch him immediately." But the storm, a mere inconvenience. He was already donning his coat, his movements swift and decisive. "Continue as the doctor instructed. I shall return with help before midday." Before she could protest further, he knelt beside Alaric's bed, pressing a kiss to the boy's burning forehead. "Fight, my son," he whispered. "Your mother and I await your return to us." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with quiet finality as he ventured into the tempest. Marienne continued her solitary vigil, whispering prayers and love against her son's ear as she bathed his fevered skin. Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering against the roof with percussive fury that matched her mounting fear. 1 hour stretched into 2, then 3, with no sign of Rowan's return. Had the storm delayed him? Had he encountered difficulty locating the ship's physician? Or had duty finally reasserted its claim, reminding the Duke of Ebonshire that his reputation could not withstand association with a common governess and her illegitimate child? The thought had barely formed when the door burst open, admitting Rowan soaked to the skin, his fine clothing plastered to his body, and a stern-faced man carrying a medical case. "Dr. Thornton," Rowan announced, water streaming from his hair and clothing to puddle on the wooden floor. "The Meridian's chief surgeon." The doctor moved immediately to Alaric's bedside, his examination efficient and unembellished by unnecessary commentary. Marienne watched with desperate hope as he administered a syrup from a small vial, then instructed her in the application of a pungent salve to the boy's chest and back. "The fever must break by nightfall," he stated, packing his instruments with brisk efficiency. "If it does not, we must consider more aggressive treatment. I shall return in 4 hours." When the physician departed, Marienne turned to find Rowan still standing where she had left him, water dripping from his sodden clothes, his face pale with exhaustion and concern. "You should change," she said softly. "There are dry clothes of my landlord's that might serve until yours can be dried." He shook his head, moving instead to Alaric's bedside where he knelt, heedless of his saturated condition. "How does he fare?" "His breathing seems easier with the salve," she admitted, "but the fever remains high." Rowan nodded, one hand gently touching Alaric's flushed cheek. "He possesses your determination. He will fight his way back to us." The simple confidence in his voice steadied her more than any elaborate reassurance could have done. As she watched him tenderly arranging the blankets around their son's small form, Marienne felt something shift within her heart, a recognition of the man before her, so different from the cold aristocrat who had once pronounced her exile. "You walked through that storm," she said, the realization striking her anew. "The Meridian is anchored at the far end of the harbor. You must have covered 3 miles in this deluge." He glanced up, surprise evident in his expression. What else would a father do when his child's life hangs in the balance? Distance and weather are mere inconveniences compared to such stakes. "The Duke of Ebonshire I once knew would have sent a servant on such an errand." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps that duke no longer exists. Perhaps he drowned in an Atlantic crossing, replaced by a man who finally understands what truly matters in this world." Before she could respond, Alaric stirred, his eyes flickering open with feverish disorientation. "Papa?" he called, his voice barely audible. "Are the stars out yet?" Rowan leaned closer, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "Not yet, my brave sailor. The storm obscures them, but they remain above the clouds, constant and true, waiting to guide you home when the sky's clear. Will you show me? When I'm better, I shall show you every constellation in the heavens," Rowan promised, on the deck of the Meridian, with the open sea before us and the entire sky as our map. Alaric's eyes drifted closed again, but his breathing seemed less labored, his small body relaxing incrementally as the medicine began its work. Marienne and Rowan maintained their vigil through the afternoon, speaking little but communicating volumes through shared glances and the synchronicity of their movements as they tended their son. As dusk gathered outside the rain-streaked windows, Alaric's fever finally broke. The transition was subtle at first, a lessening of the heat radiating from his skin, a deepening of his breathing into the natural rhythms of healing sleep. By the time Dr. Thornton returned, the crisis had clearly passed. "He will require several days of complete rest," the physician advised after his examination, "but the danger has abated. You have a remarkably resilient son, madam." "Thank you, doctor," Marienne said, relief making her voice tremble. "For everything." When they were alone again, she turned to find Rowan standing by the window, his profile etched against the gathering darkness outside. His clothes had finally dried, though they bore the wrinkled evidence of their soaking. His customary immaculate appearance had given way to something more human, hair disheveled, stubble darkening his jaw, eyes shadowed by exhaustion. "You should rest," she said, approaching him cautiously. "You've had no sleep." "Nor have you," he replied, turning to face her. In the lamplight, his amber eyes held a depth of emotion she had rarely seen during their time at Thalaverne. "I could not have endured this day without your strength, Marienne. Watching you with him, your courage, your unwavering care, I am humbled beyond words." The sincerity in his voice broke something within her, a final barrier of mistrust erected against the pain of their parting. "I never imagined we would stand here together," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "that you would cross an ocean and a storm to save the child we created. I would cross 1,000 oceans, weather 1,000 storms to protect what I now know is most precious." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Alaric, and you, Marienne, always you." She searched his face, seeking some remnant of the pride and coldness that had driven them apart. Finding none, she allowed herself to acknowledge the truth that had remained buried beneath layers of pain and protective distance. "I never stopped loving you," she confessed, the words emerging with the force of long-contained emotion. "Even when I hated what you had done, what you had forced me to become, I loved you still." Rowan's breath caught audibly. He reached out, his fingers brushing the faded ivory ribbon still tied around her wrist. "You kept it, all this time. It was all I had of you to give to Alaric someday. A tangible piece of his father, even if he never knew you." His hand moved from the ribbon to her cheek, the touch reverent and questioning. "Marry me, Marienne, not for convention or legitimacy, but because we have been incomplete without each other. Let us build the family that pride once tore asunder." She covered his hand with her own, allowing herself to lean into his touch after years of self-imposed solitude. "If I do, it must be as equals. I will not be the former governess elevated by your charity or pity. I will be your wife in truth and partnership, or not at all." "Nothing less would worthy of you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, "or of the life we shall build together." From the small bedroom came the sound of Alaric shifting in his sleep, a reminder of the precious bond they shared. As Marienne met Rowan's gaze, she saw reflected there not the Duke of Ebonshire with his burden of tradition and duty, but simply a man who had traversed oceans and storms to reclaim what his pride had once discarded. "Yes," she whispered, her heart finally opening to the possibility of a future she had never dared imagine. "Yes, I will marry you." In his arms at last, with their son sleeping peacefully beyond the doorway, Marienne knew that some journeys required exile before they could find their true destination, home. Spring arrived at Thalaverne Hall with a profusion of blossoms that transformed the ancient estate into a canvas of vibrant color. In the formal gardens, beneath an archway woven with white roses and ivy, Marienne Valacrest, soon-to-be Duchess of Ebonshire, stood with her hands clasped tightly around a simple bouquet of forget-me-nots and lavender. "Are you certain, Mamma?" Alaric asked, resplendent in his role as bearer of the rings. At 4 years old, he carried himself with the perfect blend of childish enthusiasm and solemn duty. "Truly certain." She knelt, careful not to disturb the folds of her gown, a creation of ivory silk far simpler than convention might demand of a duchess-to-be, yet perfect in its elegant restraint. "Why do you ask, my love?" "Because once His Grace, Father, places that ring upon your finger, we shall never return to Baltimore." His amber eyes, so like Rowan's, regarded her with innocent wisdom. "And you were happy there, were you not, with your hats and your freedom?" Marienne touched her son's cheek, marveling at the perceptiveness that belied his tender age. "I found contentment in our little rooms above the bookshop, yes, but happiness." She glanced toward the manor house where Rowan awaited their arrival for the private ceremony. "True happiness requires wholeness, Alaric, and we were incomplete without your father, though we scarcely knew it then." The boy nodded, apparently satisfied with her answer. "Lady Seraphine says a duke should not marry a governess," he added, lowering his voice confidentially. "She told Mrs. Winters that father has taken leave of his senses." A smile curved Marienne's lips. "And what did you tell Lady Seraphine when you overheard this assessment?" Alaric's expression turned impish. "I informed her that father says love is the only sense worth preserving, and that titles tarnish, while true hearts remain untouched by time." Laughter escaped her, bright and unrestrained, a sound once foreign to the austere corridors of Thalavern Hall, but increasingly common in the months since their return from America. "You quoted him perfectly, my clever one. He says I have your memory and his audacity," Alaric replied proudly. "A formidable combination." She straightened, adjusting the circlet of spring blossoms that crowned her upswept hair. "Now shall we proceed? It would be most improper to keep His Grace waiting on his wedding day." Hand in hand, they traversed the garden path that led to the manor's private chapel. Originally built to serve the spiritual needs of generations of Thalaverns, the intimate stone structure had been transformed for this occasion into a sanctuary of candlelight and flowers. Only a handful of witnesses awaited inside, those loyal servants and tenants who had welcomed Marienne's return with genuine warmth rather than the society guests' convention might have demanded. At the chapel entrance, Alaric squeezed her hand once before assuming his ceremonial position, his small shoulders squared with the importance of his role. Marienne paused in the doorway, her gaze meeting Rowan's across the modest space. The Duke of Ebonshire stood tall and proud before the altar, but his expression as he beheld his bride contained nothing of the cold aristocrat who had once pronounced her exile. Instead, his amber eyes shone with an emotion that transcended title or station, the simple, profound love of a man who had crossed oceans to reclaim what pride had discarded. As she moved toward him, Marienne was struck by the journey that had brought them to this moment. From governess and duke, to exiled mother and distant father, to two people united by the precious life they had created and the love that had survived separation, ocean, and storm. "You take my breath away," Rowan whispered as she reached his side, his voice meant for her alone. "Just as you did the first time I saw you in the library, defending the merits of Shakespeare to my rather stuffy cousin." "I recall you found my passion for literature most unseemly in a governess," she replied, her tone teasing despite the solemnity of the occasion. "I found it utterly bewitching," he corrected, taking her hand in his, "and feared it accordingly. A duke who loses his heart to a governess must either abandon convention or deny his own happiness. I chose wrongly once before. I shall not make that mistake again." The ceremony itself was brief yet profound, their vows exchanged with clear voices that carried the weight of their shared history. When Rowan slipped the ring, a simple gold band rather than the ostentatious diamond her new position might warrant, onto her finger, Marienne felt the completion of a circle begun years before in stolen glances across Thalavern's grand ballroom. "With this ring I thee wed," he pronounced, his voice steady, despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "and pledge to you not only my name and protection, but the heart you awakened when I believed duty had silenced it forever." Alaric watched the exchange with solemn approval, his small hands clasped around the velvet cushion that had held the rings. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, the boy was the first to applaud, his childish enthusiasm breaking the reverential silence and drawing smiles from even the most reserved attendants. Later, as twilight settled over Thalavern's grounds, the newly formed family stood together on the terrace overlooking gardens now silvered by moonlight. Alaric, permitted to stay awake far beyond his usual hour in honor of the occasion, leaned against his father's side while Rowan's arm encircled Marienne's waist. "Are you content, Duchess?" Rowan asked softly, using her new title with gentle humor. "Or do you already miss your millinery shop and modest rooms?" Marienne considered the question thoughtfully, her gaze taking in the grandeur of the estate that was now her home. "I miss certain aspects of our life there," she admitted. "The simplicity, perhaps. The knowledge that every comfort we enjoyed came from our own efforts rather than inherited privilege." "And yet," he prompted, sensing her unspoken conclusion, "and yet I would not trade this moment, the three of us together beneath the same stars that guided us home, for all the independence Baltimore offered." She touched the ivory ribbon she had transferred from her wrist to her bouquet, a symbol of their journey from separation to union. "Besides, I have extracted a most solemn promise from His Grace that our son shall be raised with an appreciation for honest labor, regardless of his eventual title." Rowan's chuckle warmed the evening air. "Indeed you have. I believe your exact words were, 'No son of mine shall believe worth comes from birth rather than character.' A sentiment with which I find myself in complete agreement," he added, his expression growing more serious. "For it was not my title that brought you back to me, but the discovery of my own heart, a treasure I had nearly lost through pride and blindness." Alaric yawned widely, interrupting the moment with childish pragmatism. "Father, you promised to show me Polaris from the observatory once you and Mama were properly married. Are you properly married now?" Both adults laughed, the sound blending harmoniously in the quiet evening. "Most properly," Rowan confirmed, ruffling his son's dark curls. "However, I believe stargazing shall wait for tomorrow night. Your mother and I have another engagement this evening." Colour rose to Marienne's cheeks at his meaning, though she met his gaze with equal promise. "Indeed we do. But first, let us see this young astronomer safely to bed." Together they walked through the halls of Thalavern, a family united not by convention or duty, but by the stronger bonds of love, freely given and received. As they tucked Alaric beneath the covers of his bed, no longer a small cot in a cramped apartment, but a proper chamber adjacent to their own suite, Marienne marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect unity. "Tell me again about the ocean crossing," Alaric murmured sleepily as Rowan adjusted his blankets. "When you came to find us." "That tale requires a voice far more poetic than mine," Rowan replied, glancing at Marienne with a smile, "for it is truly your mother's story to tell." She sat on the edge of the bed, her wedding gown rustling softly in the quiet room. "Once," she began, her voice gentle with memory and love, "there was a woman who crossed an ocean carrying two precious treasures, a child beneath her heart, and the memory of a love she believed lost forever." "And then," Alaric prompted, though his eyes were already closing with the inexorable pull of sleep. "And then," Rowan continued, his hand finding Marienne's upon the coverlet, "a man discovered what truly mattered in this world. Not title or tradition or the hollow approval of society, but the beating of a heart that had found its match in someone he had foolishly sent away. So he crossed the ocean too," Alaric murmured. "He did," Marienne confirmed, "and in doing so discovered that the greatest journey is not measured in miles or nautical charts, but in the distance between pride and humility, between fear and courage, between exile and homecoming." As their son drifted into peaceful slumber, Rowan drew Marienne to her feet and into his embrace. Against her lips, he whispered words that bridged the final distance between their past and their future. "Welcome home, my love. At last, we are both where we belong." True love transcends the boundaries of pride, status, and circumstance. In the journey of Rowan and Marienne, we witness how the heart's truest navigation is not guided by the stars of social expectation, but by the unwavering light of authentic connection. Their story reminds us that our most profound moments of growth often begin with painful separation, forcing us to confront the illusions we hold about ourselves and what truly matters in life. Pride may build walls that seem impenetrable, but love, especially when reflected in the innocent eyes of a child, possesses the quiet strength to dismantle them, stone by stone. The Duke crossed an ocean to find what he had lost, only to discover that the greatest distance he travelled was not measured in nautical miles, but in the journey from arrogance to humility. Remember that sometimes we must lose what we treasure most to recognize its true value. And when life grants us the rare blessing of a second chance, we must embrace it with both hands, casting aside the chains of convention that would bind us to paths of hollow duty rather than authentic joy. For in the end, no title or fortune can warm the chambers of a solitary heart. Our true legacy lies not in what we inherit or possess, but in the love we dare to pursue across whatever oceans may separate us from those who make our souls complete. Has this tale of love across oceans and social boundaries touched your heart? If you've ever experienced the transformative power of love, or longed for a connection that transcends life's barriers, subscribe to our channel for more Victorian romance stories that remind us what truly matters in this fleeting existence. Share in the comments below your thoughts on Rowan and Marienne's journey. Have you ever had to cross your own ocean of pride or circumstance to find love? Or perhaps you've been the one waiting on distant shores, hoping for someone to brave the storm for you. Your stories matter to us, and each new subscription helps us continue bringing these timeless tales of redemption, courage, and love to life. Press the bell notification so you never miss our weekly uploads of passionate Victorian romances. With heartfelt gratitude from all of us at Victorian Romance Audio Stories, we thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. Until our paths cross again in another tale of hearts united against all odds, remember that true love is always worth the voyage.